Afters by Oleanderhoney. Chapter 8. Promise, or The Love Song of Jane Watson. Summary. Jane's past haunts her, but there is always one constant in the darkness. Sherlock. She was a doctor, and he was a nurse. They met in the aftermath of a raid where the air was hot and close and smelled of death under that hateful tent. It was the first time she couldn't manage to save a single person. It's not supposed to get easier no matter what they tell you in med school, he said. He sits next to her on that smooth boulder she would go sometimes to think. He hands her his canteen. How do you not let it affect you? I don't. They all affect me. Because if they didn't, their life wouldn't mean anything. Then why do this? She said, her voice torn. Why bother? Because it's worth it if there's at least one that you can save. And what about days like today? Days like today. He trailed off and rubbed his chin. They're meant to remind us that we aren't God. She drew in a ragged breath and blinked back her tears. She walked better when he was by her side. Faster, more confidently. He knew what she needed before she even asked. And always, on a bad night, they would sit together on that rock that was quickly becoming theirs, and share sips of water from a canteen, pretending it was something stronger. But not good tonight, Jane. He'd sigh wearily. Yeah, she'd reply. But not good tonight. He laced her fingers with his, and they would sit there until dawn. Being in the tent wasn't enough. She was sick of the futility. Infantry medic! You could be killed out there, he roared. I'm dying in here, she shouted back. He turned his back on her, breathing heavily in his anger, in his fear. Don't you see? By the time they bring them to us, it's too late, she said in a shattered voice. I'm going with you, he said, and wouldn't look at her. Their company was attacked and near slaughtered one day during a field expedition. Only the two of them were left alive and taken captive. They shared a small concrete room for 3 weeks, completely cut off from the outside world and constantly afraid for their lives. They shared stories about their childhoods and jokes from the past. They shared breath when the nightmares came, and they could do nothing but cling to each other. They shared the heat of the night and skin like an island, because they knew it might be their last. Their sweat mingled and their lips crashed, and they made their own violence in the dark to cancel out the violence that plagued their waking dreams. And after, she looked up at him, and his green eyes glittered like emeralds in the moonlight. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. Promise me that we will make it back to London, because when we do, I'm going to marry you, he said, his voice like crushed silk. She couldn't stop the tears then. because there was no way she could promise such a thing. So she simply cried into his shoulder while he held her close and whispered her name. Jane. Oh, Jane. They brought them out from time to time to work on their injured. They were silent and cooperative, and walked like two parts of a whole. They observed their enemy and gathered a strategy. He stole the key to their cell during the 12th week. Not yet, he said, and hid it in the crack of their wall. We have to wait. Sick. Hot. Jane feels him rubbing her back as she retches miserably in the corner. It's all right. We're going to get out of here soon, I promise. Thunder. Not the kind that comes from the sky. Jane, delirious, was woken to the urgency of cool hands and late afternoon sun slanting through the bars of their window. Firefight. Gunshots. Explosions. It was time. He drags her by the hand through the camp, dodging from tent to tent, vehicle to vehicle. He stops and looks around, leaving her standing by the side of a building. She doesn't understand why he suddenly starts running towards her until she sees the glint of the sniper rifle in the building adjacent from them. He tackles her just as the bullet tears through them both. Jane screamed in frustration when her knees buckled under his weight for the 10th time. Her shoulder burned in agony, and her exhaustion finally got the better of her, and they sank down into the sand. You have to go now, love, he said, and then coughed, blood flecking his lips. I'm not, she said fiercely, tears streaking down her face. She tried to lever him up again, but he cried out in pain. Stop, stop, Janie, he gasped. I'm done, I can't. No, no, you're not, she said, and hauled him up again. She dragged him to a shady area, sheltered by some scrub and a large boulder. I'll be back for you. He grabbed her wrist, eyes wild and fierce. Promise me, Jane, you will make it back to London. He placed his other hand over her stomach, tears flowing freely. She brushes his dark, sweaty hair out of his eyes and kisses his forehead. We both will, she vowed, blinking away the spots and bursts of light from her vision. If she was going to do this, she had to go now. Hot. Too hot. Tacky blood clinging to her front. She didn't know how, but she found herself face down in the sand. She willed herself to get up and keep walking. She struggles to her feet. A gush of hot blood makes her thighs sticky, and the pain in her shoulder is like no other. She collapses next to the road. Please, God, let me live. She wakes later, in another tent, with unfamiliar voices all around her, and her whole body is a vector for pain. Someone is trying to ask her questions, and the words sound funny. American, she thinks, just before the darkness swallows her again. When she wakes, fully lucid for the first time, 6 weeks have passed, and she doesn't have to ask them. She knows. She finds that it's hard to want to live after they've taken and destroyed the only piece she had of him. The only piece that survived. His name is on her lips when she falls asleep that night. And in the morning, everything is grey. They've ruined her, emptied her out with nothing but a jagged scar to tell the story of her loss. A fissure from rib to hip. Never again. Part of her tells herself that she doesn't mind. She knows she's broken. She knows she'll never love. Her love bled out on the sand under the constant sun. She's vacuous. Her nightmares come in pieces, and she never knows which one it'll be. Sometimes she wakes with nothing more than an ache in her chest, and sometimes she wakes screaming in phantom pain. When this happens, there is one thing that is certain above all else. One thing that is a constant, that anchors her to the present. That when Jane cries out in the night, Sherlock is already there pulling her against him, reminding her that she is no longer alone. He brought her colors back. He fills the emptiness inside of her that was present for so long. He is her secret, and she cradles it close to her heart. He is half asleep already, and just as he drops off, she clutches his hand and holds it tight against her chest. The end.